Good evening and welcome to the Planning and Zoning Commission Thursday, February 13th, 2004 meeting. The first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. And Maria, maybe you can lead us in that tonight, please.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The second item on the agenda tonight is our annual election of the chairman and the vice chairman, and I will turn it over to Mr. DeBrawl for that, please, if you would handle that.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. As this is the first meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission of this year, the first order of business is to elect a new chairman and vice chairman. This is done by nomination. I'll open the floor for nominations for chairman.
I would like to nominate Sam.
Second.
Nomination and a second. Are there any other nominations? Close the floor to nominations. All those in favor of Mr. Zimmerman as chairman, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries unanimously. Congratulations, Mr. Zimmerman. The gavel stays with you.
Thank you, I think. And do we need to have an election for vice chair?
Yes, you can conduct that now that you're the chair.
No, I'll let you please. You please go ahead and do that as well, if you would.
Then I'd open the floor to nominations for vice chair.
I nominate Todd again.
Nominate Mr. Brugnano. Is there a second to that nomination? And in absentia, he would not be able to object, and there's no rule prohibiting his nomination that he's not here, although I'm sure if he's watching at home, he might be making comments toward the chair. But any other nominations? Close the floor to nominations and call the question. All those in favor for Mr. Brugnano to continue as vice chair, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. Carries unanimously. Again, Mr. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Status quo. Okay, so item number 3 on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the December 12th, 2013 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
Move that we approve.
Maria has a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Items number 4 and 4A and B are 2 items that are on consent. It's the Windsor Plat 28 and the Falls at Grand Harbor. Mr. DeBrawl, is it meaningful even to ask if there have been any ex parte communications about these? Not really. They're on consent. But I will ask, is there anyone in the audience? You do have a right to speak on this issue. If you have an opinion you would like to speak, now is a good time. Anyone on the commission have anything, or should we just go ahead and accept the recommendations of staff to approve these 2 items?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve staff's recommendations.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Those 2 items on consent both pass unanimously. Item number 5 is an item that is not on consent, is a quasi-judicial issue. It's the Hammocks Lakes Phase 3. Should we swear anyone in now, Mr. DeBrawl?
Yes.
Okay, so anyone that would like to speak or expects to speak during this matter, please stand and be sworn in.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Mr. Bowling, will you please go ahead and take this away and introduce us to this issue, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Stan Bowling, Community Development Director, and John McCoy will be presenting this item.
I assume there are no ex parte communications by the board members.
Are there any ex parte communications by any of the board members on this issue or on any issues that will be for us tonight? The remaining ones being the Indian River Medical Center and Hammocks Lakes Phase 3. If so, speak up. If
No.
not, I'll assume your silence is the answer no.
No.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman Zimmerman. John McCoy with the planning staff. This is Hammock Lake's request for preliminary PD, and the project has a little bit of history. It was conceptually approved by the Board of County Commissioners in 2004. That conceptual approval is still in effect and still valid. Subsequent to that conceptual plan approval, there was a preliminary plan approval that was granted That preliminary plan approval has subsequently expired. The applicant is now seeking preliminary plan approval for a preliminary PD plan that is consistent with the original conceptual plan, and that's what's before you all tonight. From a location standpoint, it's located on the north side of First Street Southwest. The subject site is zoned RS3. This action will not change the zoning. The site continues to remain RS3. The property to the north, which is Stonebridge, is also a planned development zoned RS3, and the property to the south are the two previous phases of Hammock Lakes Phase 1 and 2, also planned developments. If this is approved, the homes will be similar to those in Hammock Lakes Phase 1 and 2. The aerial shows the subject site and shows the residential development to the north, to the south, Hammock Lakes. To the east is Stevens Park, and the property to the west is generally vacant. And there are some trees on the site. It was an old grove, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on that later in the staff report. This is a layout of the proposed development, and it's very similar to Hammock Lakes Phase 1 and 2. It's an internal loop with a cul-de-sac that does extend into the stormwater system. It is 96 single-family lots and has a recreation tract. From a buffering and landscaping plan, it will have a type B buffer around the entire perimeter with a 6-foot opaque feature. That'll consist of a berm, landscape, including shrubs, understory, and canopy trees. And along First Street Southwest, the applicant's proposing a wall also as a 6-foot opaque feature with landscaping on both sides of that wall. You can also see the two landscape tracks. One is at the end of the cul-de-sac and just basically opens up a view to the lake, and the other's a little bit larger in the southeast corner of the subject site, and it allows for some recreation facilities and playground facilities there within the proposed development. As far as traffic and stormwater, it will have access to First Street Southwest that will be gated. It will also have an emergency access to 50th Avenue, which is on the east perimeter. The stormwater tract is central and forms a central lake, and many of the lots are back up to the lake and the stormwater system. As far as dedication and improvements, there are a number of those, and those figure into the conditions at the end of the staff report. There is the emergency access that I mentioned. There's a 10-foot right-of-way dedication for First Street Southwest. There's a 25-foot right-of-way dedication for 50th Avenue, and that will complete the local road minimum right-of-way of 60 feet in width, because a half street was platted with Stevens Park. Actually, a little bit more than a half street. 35 feet was platted with Stevens Park. The project, through the final plat, will allow the stormwater management tract within the subdivision to be used to treat stormwater for the roadway improvements, both 50th Avenue and any widening that may occur on First Street Southwest. Sidewalks are required along First Street Southwest and 50th Avenue. The applicant is required to escrow their fair share for the improvements to 50th Avenue. The internal street lights and sidewalks are required, and an internal playground is also proposed on the recreation tract. I'd like to talk a little bit about tree mitigation, and this is sort of a more detailed aerial of the subject site. And you can see the north-south orientation of the furrows where the site was at one time a working citrus grove. That citrus grove has long since matured and been pushed over, and there have been a number of hardwood, mostly laurel oaks, that have been established on the site. The site is subject to the tree mitigation criteria in the county's code, and environmental planning staff have been on the site a couple of times and conceptually arrived at a mitigation plan. And that will include preservation of some of the trees, relocation of others, and then lastly, a fee in lieu of, which is also in the code. So it'll be a combination of all of those. And a detailed mitigation plan will need to be approved by environmental planning prior to the issuance of a land clearing and tree removal permit, and actually any removal of those trees. And that is also included in staff's recommendation. And with that, I would like to get to the recommendation, and staff does recommend that you all grant preliminary PD plan plat approval with the conditions as outlined in staff's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. I will ask to hear from the applicant, but before I do that, I'll ask the commissioners, are there any questions? Are there any comments on this at this time? I mean, we'll have more later, but does anybody want to step in and ask for some clarification or any questions?
When was the original approval? When did that expire?
The original approval was granted in,
'04.
the preliminary PD was August 12th of '04, and it expired August 12th of 2013.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions. I didn't see where, on the plan, where the recreation areas were, because you talked about particularly a playground and things like that. Is that to be worked out in later plans, or did I just miss it?
Let me flip back to the overhead for just a second here.
Didn't see it on the plan. I
Illustrate.
couldn't imagine. where-
Southeast corner, I believe.
The southeast corner is where the
Is where the new
recreation
playground.
track is going to occur, and also the emergency access will be at that location. And there will be more detail provided at the land development permit stage and subsequent as far as the actual physical improvements to those sites. So right now, it's just depicted as a green space.
My next question is this. I remember when we were doing the LDRs and we were updating them, we went back and forth, and there was kind of we butted heads a little bit about the idea of interconnectivity between, neighborhoods. Is the reason that there's no interconnectivity required in this is because it's under a conceptual PD from 2004, but it otherwise would?
That is correct. That is one of the things that the conceptual plan did vest them for, was essentially, this is pretty much the same design that was approved conceptually. But yes, that is true. And we've looked at that as a number of other developments as they're coming through the process.
Right. And my other question is this: is it code that there needs to be? I mean, it seems a little peculiar to me. It must be code. I guess I'm answering my own question. Why there would be a 25-foot berm required between two exactly same zoned RS3 developed residential neighborhoods? I mean, I understand on the road, and I understand against non-compatible uses. Why do we have that between neighbors?
Correct. Where the backyards back up to one another, that was a feature that was approved with the conceptual plan. And our LDRs have gone back and forth on this issue of providing buffers between essentially like uses.
Right.
And in this case, it is a 25-foot wide. The physical feature is a 6-foot tall opaque feature. This was required with the conceptual plan. And the way the plan development ordinance is written for, and I'm going to shoot from the hip here, like uses, there's what's called a transitional area where you essentially match the density of the adjacent property, lot size, lot width for
recall
the
that.
first 150 feet,
Right.
or you provide the buffer. In this case, at the time it was conceptually approved, the buffer was required and is still required.
So I understand. So the long and the short of some of the questions I'm asking about is the ghost in the machine from the PD 2004. It would look quite different actually if it was developed completely under current regs.
Yes, it could, yes.
And also, just to add to that, I think the applicant did not want to go back through the public hearing process
No, I
and the PD
understand.
process, so they're,
Well, I don't object to this. I mean, I don't. I'm not the one who thinks that interconnectivity is the greatest thing in the world anyway. But I was just curious about it. My last question is: the escrow funds for the future development improvement of 50th Avenue, has that amount been determined?
That has not been determined.
Okay. I don't have any more questions. Does anyone else have any questions here before I ask if the applicant would like to speak? You're welcome. Please. No.
Mr. Chairman, I just have one question.
Yes, sir.
Mr. McCoy, as far as the sidewalk on First Street Southwest, is there any reason that shouldn't be built before final plat approval?
Yes,
And avoid bonding it out?
it should be built prior to the certificate of completion, correct. And if it isn't built at the time of final plat, it should be, in other words, financially guaranteed to be completed with the subdivision improvements. Those and the common area sidewalks would be items that we would look for to get constructed at the time the land development work is being done. The sidewalk along 50th Avenue will get rolled into the escrow since the 50th Avenue improvement is less well-defined.
Very well, thank you.
No. I mean, no. It's completely up. Thank you. Any other questions? Do we have a motion?
I move that we approve with staff's recommendations.
Second.
Let's have a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Go back to my agenda here. Bear with me for a moment. Thank you. 5B is Indian River Medical Center, Health and Wellness Center. Again, I know we already have confirmed that there have been no ex parte communications, so with that, I will turn it over to John.
Yes, thank you,
Okay.
Chairman Zimmerman, and I will go to the slides and the PowerPoint presentation. This is a request by Indian River Medical Center and Anchor Health, and they're actually requesting two separate things. They're requesting major site plan approval for a wellness center, and they're also requesting approval of a parking study, and I'll explain those as we go through this presentation. The subject site's located on the south side of 37th Street. It's essentially the hospital campus. The entire area of development is zoned med, although there are areas of the hospital campus, namely the retention area, that are zoned residential, and that shows on the eastern sort of center side of this slide. And here's an aerial that shows the overall campus. And the proposed improvements are actually overlaid on this aerial in gray. This is provided by the applicant. And you can see the building here in the center. This is the proposed, and it's basically just south and east of a patient wing for the hospital. And you can see the parking proposed in these areas to serve the Health and Wellness Center, and also to the south. This is the present Oncology Center right here, and that's area development is not proposed for much alteration with this particular application. And you can see the driveways that loops back up to 37th Street. The proposed area development is generally located on the east side of the campus. And one of the things I should have also pointed out, there is a little parking lot addition in the northwest corner, but generally the area of development is along the eastern side of the existing hospital campus, where the proposed construction and development will occur with this particular aspect. These improvements are also in gray, and again, this is the Wellness Center building. This is the parking lot to serve it, southern parking lot, oncology, parking and perimeter access, loop road. Talk a little bit about the parking study. Parking studies are allowed in our parking ordinance for two reasons. One is a non-concurrent, where uses essentially have different peak parking demands, so they physically share the same parking over time. The other is what we call a no similar use study, where the use really isn't specified in our code, or maybe an aggregation or a combination of uses. And that's the case with this particular application, is it is a variety or an aggregation of uses. And what the applicant will do for a parking study, it's generally reviewed in detail by our traffic engineering division, and then also by the community development division. The applicant collects data at 3 different sites for 3 different days, and that's done in 15-minute increments, essentially surveying the parking lot. So they observe the peak parking demand and time. That is then adjusted for a peak season. 15% safety factors added, and in this case, a rate of 1 space per 300 square feet of building area was determined. Their staff is recommending a higher rate of 1 space per 250 square feet. So there's yet another safety factor built in there to get you to the 1 space per 250 square feet of floor area. With that, if you took sort of a code and just aggregated all those uses and then added up the spaces, it would be 720 spaces that would be required based on the study at the rate of the 250, or one space per 250 square feet of building area. It's 561 spaces are required, and the applicant's providing 569 spaces for this use. And you can see again where the parking spaces lay out. There's a parking area south of the loop road, and then mostly to the east of the subject site, with a parking lot also west of the building, and then a parking bay addition in the northwest corner of the overall hospital campus. As far as traffic circulation, the actual access points to the hospital campus are not going to change. They essentially have 3 driveways. They have a very western driveway, which is actually more of a street that forms that perimeter loop road. Then they have a western driveway that serves their parking lot, and an eastern driveway that serves their parking lot facilities that's signalized with 10th court across the street. There's an existing signal there today. As a result of the traffic impact study that was done for this, it was determined that turn lanes, eastbound right turn lanes are required at both driveways. So the applicant will be required to, those are site related, so the applicant's required to fund those entirely. And then there's also an upgrade to the signal required for that. The county is proposing to widen 37th Street between US 1 and Indian River Boulevard from 3 lanes to 5 lanes in the 2016 fiscal year. So what Public Works and Traffic Engineering is recommending is that the developer enter into developer degree to contribute funds to constructing those 2 right turn lanes and essentially pay for their fair share of the signal improvements, or for the signal upgrade at the eastern driveway. That developer's agreement would need to be approved prior to the issuance, or prior to the release of a site plan and construction on the site. And that agreement would need to be approved by the Board of County Commissioners, is ultimately where it would be approved at. Next item I'd like to go over is a landscape plan, and it's fairly straightforward. They're going to essentially landscape the area of developments to code. There is one buffer required right along the southern perimeter where they do abut a residential multifamily district. The southeast property here is the Florida Baptist Retirement Center, although their main improvements are quite a distance from the property line. Next item I'd like to talk about is tree mitigation on this site as well. And the applicant's done a lot of work here, and they've worked with our environmental planning folks. And the 2 areas where tree mitigation will come into play are this southern area where the parking lot's proposed. And this area is the ambulatory surgery center building that's an existing building. That building will be demolished as part of this proposal. And this is the area that you see on the site that's going to become that eastern parking lot adjacent to the subject site. So some of the trees will be preserved within that parking lot. Some will be removed due to the layout of the parking lot. And through the development proposal in coordination with our environmental planning staff, some of the trees on this site will be relocated as part of the landscape plan and incorporated into the landscape plan. Some will be preserved into the landscape plan, but some will be removed. And for those that are being removed, the applicant will need to essentially pay a fee in lieu of mitigation. And for some, they will be planting additional trees within the landscape that will be upgraded to also count for the mitigation on a caliper inch basis. Again, the detail plan needs to be approved prior to the issuance of a land clearing tree removal permit. One last item I'd like to talk about, and that's the building elevation. And there are a couple parts or points in the staff report where I mentioned that the hospital campus, there was a height variance approved in 1973 that runs with the land that the hospital campus is subject to, and it allows buildings to be built at a substantial height. The height proposed for this building is 58 feet, which is well within the bounds of the variance that was allowed. And in building it to the 58, and that's building height, the actual roof structure is going to project above that 58 height foot. That's where the roof is, and there's some elevator and some other stairwells that project above that. But it does project into the height notification zone, given its proximity to the Vero Beach Airport. And as such, it will be required to get a clearance letter from the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, prior to actually site plan release and being cleared to build the structure. We do not anticipate a problem with that, since it's very similar to the height of the existing hospital. And with that, I would like to get to the recommendation, and staff does recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission grant approval of the no similar use parking study, and also grant major site plan approval with the conditions as outlined by staff in the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Any questions from any members of the commission?
Yes, since we're being asked to approve the study, I just would like you to clarify a minor discrepancy between the study and your report. On page 3 of your report, the required spaces are 561. And on the third page of attachment 3, according to the study, the required spaces are 563.
Yes.
And so why is there that discrepancy?
In the report, and the report was done somewhat in advance of the site plan, because a lot of it's a very data intensive collection. The building they proposed in the report was I think about 400 square feet larger. So when you look at that building size and compare the building size in the report to the building size in the site plan staff report, you'll see that difference. And I think it's about 600 square feet, 500 or 600 square feet. So that's the reason that it was adjusted downward, was to the ratio matches the building on the site plan.
Okay, one other question about the study and how it was done is, has there been shown that there is a linear relationship between square footage and parking requirements? Because all 3 of the study sites, 2 of them were 120,000, one was 76,000, and that's being compared to a proposed project that's 140,000. So is there a linear relationship in this, or is there some reason we might expect with 140,000 square feet there might be more required parking?
I do not know the answer as to the linear relationship. I can tell you with smaller sites, it tends to be more parking intensive. In other words, you have a higher ratio per square foot, and I don't know if at some point that might reverse itself, or whether it's a fitted curve or a linear. And
is there any reason why there wasn't, as part of the study, a square footage that more closely approximated what is proposed?
The applicant worked closely with our traffic engineering department. Our traffic engineering department actually approves the methodology, which includes the sites selected. At least 2 of the sites selected were developed by the developer, and they were familiar with the operations from an internal aspect, an operations and a management end of it. So they felt comfortable that that was indicative of how this facility would behave. And that's why those 2 were selected. And again, finding a facility that matches the same as, I don't know why, or if there is a facility that's similar enough that, but that was done through our traffic engineering division. I know that 2 are similar operationally.
If I could piggyback on to what John said just a little bit, I think there are points in time when scale does matter, and there are, as John was saying, there are thresholds. We see that especially in retail or contractors, trades type of uses. You get below a certain threshold, and you do have a higher parking rate per square foot, and it tends to blend and reduce actually on a per square foot basis as you get higher. From our experience and traffic engineering's experience, the thresholds you're looking at, 70,000, 120,000, is not so small that it's that out of scale. And I think what the other thing is John was pointing out, and the applicant could probably speak to this when they talk, what they were really looking for was something of an appropriate scale, which I think is the case here. And then the other is really the mix of uses, and to find a really good on-point examples, because that's what's really driving the study, is that mix of uses overall reduces from if you just total them up individually. I think that's why they chose those.
Can I ask you a question, Stan? Help me understand this, because I guess where I'm a little bit confused is not understanding what this use is. I mean, is it medical office? I mean, why is this something that's not in the code? Because when I read the very brief,
It's really,
it's a diagnostic, medical office, and an admin. It seems like those are things that would be in our code.
and
What
well.
is it?
No, that's
What's
a
this building?
great question. I'll give you the 20-second answer, and then I'll let the applicant go into all the programmatic issues. It's really partly like a health and fitness center, the wellness center, where people can work out, and part of the workout can also be part of the rehab. And there's a relationship there, and you tend to see those things more and more now, I think, with more modern medical campuses. So it's a place an employee could work out and a place where somebody could rehab, and there's some overlap there. There's also some hospital administration functions in it. It's physically connected. The second floor is connected to that patient wing that John was pointing out earlier. So there's some hospital functions. And then there's some medical office functions that aren't exactly hospital functions. So there's really three categories at play here. And so when those are totaled up, it doesn't really demonstrate, I think, some of the synergy that's between the three. But I think the applicant could probably explain the programmatic differences.
Before he does, let me ask you a question. Would medical office space and the things that are in our code, would those typically have a higher parking ratio than they would?
I guess they
typically
would.
Yes.
So the mixture of these uses is lowering the required
That's
parking.
correct.
If it fits straight into our code.
Yes.
If this were hospital or office, medical office or something like that, there'd be more required.
That's correct. And medical office especially would really drive. 1 to 175 is medical office. It's a pretty high generation, but of course, you don't tend to get, this, we haven't had this mix of uses before.
Correct. And I'll follow up with Stan a little bit. For an aggregation, it's a little over 700 spaces. So if you just took them and aggregated what we have in our code and the way they behave as a standalone use, and again, not addressing the scale. The other item is it doesn't take into account the synergy with the hospital.
Right.
The doctor's offices will be, as I understand it, doctors that do have rights at the hospital. So they may be parking there, making the rounds, and then coming back and having office hours. So they may be at the hospital, they may be in their office, but they're still parking on the campus, overall campus.
I understand.
John, how many spaces are in the northwest parking expansion?
I do not have that exact number.
But that's tied in, despite its location, to the Health and Wellness Center, correct, in this?
Yes,
As part
it
of the
is.
overall formula? Okay.
Yes, it is.
And that's an example, I think, where that parking addition is remote from the wellness center, but the wellness center is close to other parking spaces for the hospital. So that's kind of looking at that interconnected, kind of campus-wide
Makes sense.
issue.
Okay.
Can we hear from the applicant?
Yeah.
Just state your name and address for the record.
Steve Moeller, Mass Steller Moeller, representing Anchor Indian River and the hospital. Be glad to answer any questions you might have. You touched on a couple things. When we started this project, with our client, we looked at it as it was a medical building. So from the standpoint of the parking study, we told our client, you've got a medical building, and we said, divided this square footage by 175 and said you need 720 spaces. And they said, we never need that much. They built buildings like this, multiple buildings like this in Pennsylvania and other states. They don't have any in Florida. But in revealing that to us, they said, what are our options? So we said to do a parking study. So we came to the county and selected 2 of their buildings as well as one in Florida that's up in Melbourne. And on that basis, we did the study. We did not really, as you suggested, Sam, take a look in the building and say how much is really medical, how much is admin, how much is diagnostic, how much is wellness, and try to break it down. We really looked at this project as it was similar to those other projects that they had already done, and so we studied those and another one, and that was the data we collected. So that's how we arrived at the answer we did. In fact, the site, this is a little bit different because there's actually, as John suggested, there's even more synergy possible on this project because the sites we studied were actually standalone buildings. They weren't really next to hospitals. As for instance, the one up in Melbourne, I was quite surprised when I found out it's 120,000 square feet. When I went to the site, I thought I was going to go up there and find some 600 parking spaces. Well, they had, I'm ballparking it, but they had about 300. And it was a site that is very tight. We all live here, so you may know it. It's when you go into Melbourne, it's on the left, it's Crane Creek. And it's a 6-story building that has a lot of parking underneath and parking outside. And they have no parking problems there ever. I met with them personally to find out that, number one, all these buildings are full, I should say that. They're not, 1/3 full, and that's why it works. They're all 100% occupied. We found, I was delighted to find that it actually works up there. They don't have any problems. Their parking lot, it gets close to being full sometimes, but they only have half the parking that our code requires, when in fact Melbourne's code is exactly the same as Indian River County's as far as how many spaces you have to have for medical. So they did basically the same thing up there. There was another question that somebody had, and I can't remember what it was. Oh, the northwest parking lot. Let me clarify that. The northwest parking lot is not for the health and wellness. What we've done is we are, obviously when we're putting this building on the ground, there's some parking that's hospital parking that we're displacing. So in displacing that parking, we have to replace hospital parking, and so that was the likely place to put it, the most convenient place to put it for hospital staff.
Where are you losing spots, parking spaces?
These spaces to the southeast of the hospital structure, I'm assuming everybody's familiar with it. Maybe John can put that back up there.
Prior thing.
There's about 180 spaces there that the building is being placed in that parking lot, and then we're redistributing and building new hospital parking around the campus to remain in compliance with code.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? I think we're ready. Oh, excuse me, Maria.
The traffic circulation, when you came out, you're going to put a traffic light, only one, like where it is now?
Let me go back to the overhead for just a second to answer that.
Thank you.
There is an existing signal here. That signal will remain and be upgraded. There's no new signal. So that signal is going to remain at this location, 10th Court and 37th Street.
Well, I was just wondering, with all those extra cars, going out to making a left is almost impossible as it is now going out that side road. But they're not going to do anything to change that?
At the
right there,
at
yeah.
the west end,
I had the same
there
question.
is no proposed improvement at that location. There will be a westbound right turn lane at the, eastbound right turn lane at the driveway, at this driveway, but there are no proposed improvements at this location.
Have you tried to make a left going out of there?
I've not recently tried.
Did I hear you correctly? Because I was a little surprised to hear. I mean, just for interest's sake, is that not a dedicated street? Is that part of their internal traffic circulation thing? Is that what I thought I heard you say? That is not a public street? That right there.
This is part of the loop road. It is designated as a street from an addressing purpose. So it is a numbered street on our 911. And as far as maintenance and ownership, I do not know. This portion is on the hospital campus. This portion, the southern leg and the north-south leg on the west are on the hospital campus. And I'm not sure about this western leg.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Do I have a motion?
Was there anybody else from the public that wanted to speak, Mr. Chairman?
Anyone else from the public that would like to speak on this issue this evening? No? I'll again ask for a motion.
Move that we approve with staff's recommendations.
Second, anyone?
I'll second it.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. There are no commissioners' matters this evening. Are there any planning matters?
There are, Mr. Chairman, and just a few. Since you all last met in December, the Board of County Commissioners agreed with your recommendation and voted to transmit the Grand Harbor land use swap, or their parcels there on Indian River Boulevard. Also wanted to let you all know that there will be a meeting on February 27th for Planning and Zoning Commission. We do have a public hearing scheduled. And the last item, I wanted to introduce our new planner, our current development planner. As I moved up to take Bob's place, you know that John McCoy moved up as the current development section chief, and we've hired a senior planner, Ryan Sweeney, here, so you all can say hello to Ryan.
Welcome.
And I think actually Ryan is somewhat familiar with our area. He grew up nearby, and he's started last week and has a number of assignments already.
Look forward to working with you. Welcome aboard.
And that's all, Mr. Chairman.
Any attorneys' matters this evening?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Well, then we are adjourned.